Justin, I've often heard you advise people to make friends with fear and anxiety. That's counterintuitive. Could you
Mhm.
start by explaining to us the difference between fear and anxiety?
Yes, exactly, Rob. So that's actually where everything starts, is understanding that foundational difference between the two. So fear is a present moment emotion, right? It's something that's happening right now, this very second. And fear is something that has allowed us to survive as human beings for many, many thousands of years, right? So if you were to walk out into a city street and all of a sudden a car was coming at you at lightning speed, it would be your fear that would tell you to move out of the way of the car,
Probably a good idea.
which is a good idea, right? So it's extremely useful to our survival. What most of us are referring to when we talk about fear is actually anxiety, right? So we're worried about things that may happen in the future that aren't actually happening right now, right? So we may be worrying about running out of money, right? We might be worrying about, AI taking our job. Whatever it is that's going on for us, there's a lot of these things that can be happening. And so they're taking up a lot of our mental thought processes. So Mark Twain actually exemplified this really perfectly with a great quote. And he said, "I'm an old man and I've known a great many troubles. Most of them never happened." Right. So just think about how often we're spending in that part of our mind worried about the future. And so what happens is a lot of us don't have a healthy relationship with that anxiety, and it starts to cause us a lot of problems.
So it sounds like anxiety is some sort of version of fear that grows and builds over time and is latent and it always sits there and it drags us down.
Yeah. So actually, interestingly, so fear is considered an emotion. Anxiety is considered a mood. It can be happening, for days, for weeks, for months, right? It can actually become part of our daily experience. So this is why it's so important to create a healthy relationship with it.
Sure. And it can color all of our interactions and all of our reactions to things in life.
Absolutely.
So, but what do you mean by become friends with fear and anxiety? Because I guess a lot of people just want to avoid them both.
Exactly. So again, so fear and anxiety, it's perfectly normal to say, hey, I prefer not to experience these emotions and these moods, right? Because they're not pleasurable, right? So when we have fear, right, okay, it's just like a lightning shock throughout our whole body that tells us to get out of the way of the car. When we're experiencing anxiety, we might be noticing our belly's tight, right? Our palms start sweating. We might notice our leg starts bouncing up and down. We're talking really fast. None of that is very pleasurable. But when we start to shift our mindset around it, there's an opportunity to see it as our friend and our ally, right? That fear and anxiety have been programmed into us for good reason.
Hmm.
Our anxiety allows us to anticipate possible threats and creatively respond to them. Right. So I like to say to people, imagine anxiety being one of your most reliable members of your advisory board, on call 24 hours a day, there to let you know when your attention's needed on something. But the key thing is that when you have this anxiety, a lot of us don't have a healthy relationship with it. And a lot of times we have difficulty discerning the very simple wisdom that it has for us.
And then I would guess finding productive, self-compassionate ways of addressing those anxieties and planning in some way that to assuage those fears. So, how does having unhealthy relationship with fear and anxiety manifest in people's lives?
Yeah, absolutely. So great question. So what happens is that the key skill here is that we want to be able to have that anxiety come into our life and be able to discern the very simple wisdom that it has for us. But what's happening for a lot of us nowadays is that there's so many messages of threat that are coming into our life. We're not able to listen and gain their wisdom. And so the anxiety becomes overwhelming. And there's this thing in psychology, it's called the chronic threat cycle, right? So what happens is that as that anxiety is building up, almost like interest in a bank account,
Mm.
we start to burn out. And then once we start to feel burned out, then we start to feel depressed. And then once we feel depressed, then we start to feel overwhelmed. And round we go. So as we look at the world right now, 73% of people are experiencing some level of burnout. And a lot of times we think about that
What
from,
was that number again? 73% of
yeah,
people report experiencing some sort of burnout.
yes, exactly. Yeah. So actually, Deloitte did a study on this and found that 73% of knowledge workers are experiencing some level of burnout. And so what a lot of us think is the culprit is a lot of long hours and hard work and so forth. But oftentimes it is this anxiety and this stress that's going on behind the scenes and with us each and
Yeah.
every moment that's actually causing that mental and emotional exhaustion. But the key thing is, how are we relating to that anxiety,
Right.
right? And so that's one of the things that we always have as a choice, is how we're relating to it. And the more that we can be aware of how this is playing out within us, how it's impacting the way we're showing up,
Right.
speaking, responding. And actually, one of the questions I often get is, why is this practical?
Yeah.
right? Why is it
How does
practical?
this relate to my professional life? How does this relate to my performance? And let's get, to brass tacks here.
Yeah.
How does this relate to success in the world?
Yeah. So the very simple takeaway on that is that it really impacts our decision making, right? So what happens is that when you're in a fear response, getting out of the way of the car, you don't need to be thinking about anything else other than getting out of the way of the car, right? So the way that our brain works, the amygdala fires off and it shuts down the conscious thinking part of our brain when we're in a fear response. But the same thing happens when we're in an anxiety response. So we oftentimes lose access to a lot of the thinking and creativity and innovation and potential solutions that are available to us, which then colors the way we make decisions. So fear has a profound impact on our whole perception of the world, and therefore will impact our decision making, the way we treat and relate to others, everything. And that has huge impacts on your leadership and performance.
Well, so Justin, what's a question we'd like to leave people with to help them explore a better relationship? Yeah, maybe not friendship at first, but at least a cordial relationship with fear and anxiety.
Yeah, wonderful. So actually right now I would say, reflecting on how are fear and anxiety impacting my decisions, right? Are there certain things, are there places that I'm holding myself back? Is there certain places where maybe my scarcity beliefs are getting in the way of maybe me doing what's right in my life or in my work, right? So it's very deeply personal to all of us, but that's a great starting point. How are fear and anxiety coloring my decision making right now?
I can think of many examples, some from my own life, but also, of course, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, students, alumni, and the question often for instance, people is, when do I start my business? When is it okay to leave my current role and go off on my own? There's a lot of fear and understandably some anxiety about that. And there are a lot of practical questions they have to face.
Yes,
But the last thing you want to do is be driven by your anxiety.
exactly. And to comment on that, Rob, like that's so important. That's where fear and anxiety is your friend because, so yes, you don't want it to hold you back from being able to move forward on things. But the fact that it comes up, it gives you the opportunity to reflect on what are some of the things I need to creatively address
Right.
to be able to set this up for optimal success. So I don't just go into it blindly, right? And set myself up for failure before I even started.
Great. Thanks, Justin.
Yeah.